The prince thanked her heartily and went on his way in the best of spirits, while the little Puddock crept slowly back into the water. Here's a picture of the prince talking to Puddocky under the bridge. When the prince got home, he found his brothers had just arrived with great wagon loads of little dogs of all sorts. The king had a walnut shell ready, and the trial began. But not one of the dogs of the two eldest sons had brought with them would in the least fit into the shell. When they had tried all their little dogs, the youngest son handed his father the hazelnut with a modest bow and begged him to crack it carefully. Hardly had the old king done so than a lovely, tiny little dog sprang out of the nutshell and ran about in the king's hand, wagging its tail and barking lustily at all the other little dogs. The joy of the court was great. The father again embraced his fortunate son, commanded the rest of the small dogs to be thrown into the water and drowned, and once more addressed his sons. The two most difficult tasks have been performed. Now listen to the third and last. Whoever brings the fairest wife home with him shall be my heir. This demand seemed so easy and agreeable, and the reward was so great, that the princes lost no time in setting forth on their travels. At the crossroads, the two elder brothers debated if they should go the same way as the youngest, but when they saw how dreary and deserted it looked, they made up their minds that it would be impossible to find what they sought in these wilds, and so they stuck to their former paths. The youngest was very depressed this time and said to himself, "Anything else Puddocky could have helped me in, but this task is quite beyond her power. How could she ever find a beautiful wife for me? Her swamps are wide and empty, and no human beings dwell there, only frogs and toads and other creatures of that sort." However, he sat down as usual under the bridge, and this time he sighed from the bottom of his heart. In a few minutes, the toad stood in front of him and asked, "What's the matter with you now, my dear prince?" "Oh, Puddocky, this time you can't help me, for the task is beyond even your power," replied the prince. "Still," answered the toad, "you may as well tell me your difficulty, for who knows but I mayn't be able to help you this time also." The prince then told her the task they had been set to do. "I'll help you right enough, my dear prince," said the little toad. "Just you go home, and I'll soon follow you." With these words, Puddocky, with a spring quite unlike her usual slow movements, jumped into the water and disappeared. The prince rose up and went sadly on his way, for he didn't believe it possible that the little toad could really help him in his present difficulty. He had hardly gone a few steps when he heard a sound behind him, and looking round, he saw a carriage made of cardboard drawn by 6 big rats coming towards him. 2 hedgehogs rode in front as outriders, and on the box sat a fat mouse as coachman, and behind stood 2 little frogs as footmen. In the carriage itself sat Puddocky, who kissed her hand to the prince out of the window as she passed by. Yoo-hoo! Sunk deep in thought over the fickleness of fortune that had granted him 2 of his wishes, but now seemed about to deny him the last and best. The prince hardly noticed the absurd equipage, and still less did he feel inclined to laugh at its comic appearance. The carriage drove on in front of him for some time, and then turned a corner. But what was his joy and surprise when suddenly, round the same corner, but coming towards him, there approached a beautiful coach, drawn by 6 splendid horses, with outriders, coachmen, and footmen, and other servants, all in the most gorgeous liveries, and seated in the carriage was the most beautiful woman the prince had ever seen, and in whom he at once recognized the beautiful Parsley, for whom his heart had formerly burned. The carriage stopped when it reached him, and the footmen sprang down and opened the door for him. He got in and sat down beside the beautiful Parsley, and thanked her heartily for her help, and told her how much he loved her. And so he arrived at his father's capital, in the same moment as his brothers, who had returned with many carriage loads of beautiful women. But when they were all led before the king, the whole court, with one consent, awarded the prize of beauty to the fair Parsley. The old king was delighted, and embraced his thrice fortunate son and his new daughter-in-law tenderly, and appointed them as his successors to the throne. But he commanded the other women to be thrown into the water and drowned, like the bales of linen and the little dogs. The prince married Puddocky and reigned long and happily with her, and if they aren't dead, I suppose they are living still. Bye. See you next time.